Welcome to the first episode of Dr. And, Multidimensional Women in Medicine. I'm your host, Joanna Georgikas, and for our first episode, we'll be chatting with the show's co-producer, Dr. Kristina McAteer, about the series, podcasting in general, and her podcast, Money Minutes. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, Joanna, let me say what a pleasure it is to work with you. You are an inspiration, a powerhouse, and an energetic young lady, which inspires me. So thank you to you for making this happen. As you know, I am an emergency room physician. I've been in practice for a little over 10 years now and had gone to medical school with the idea of going into emergency medicine. I had done some EMT work back in the day, and now have circled back coming into the academic fold. And admittedly, podcasting was a wonderful niche as it allowed me to share some of my personal passions as well as get the message out about what we are doing in academic emergency medicine.
Well, thanks so much for doing this pilot episode with me. I know we've been chatting about making this podcast a reality for the past year or so, and I'm so excited we get to record this episode together.
Well, me too. I know that time is a limited quantity, and the fact that we got our schedules on the same chapter is amazing. So highlights to you for being persistent and not letting go of your dream. That's what it's all about, being disciplined and keep moving forward.
Well, thanks so much. I thought we'd start this episode by giving our listeners a little bit more information about our series. So I mentioned this in the intro, so if you haven't listened to that, take a listen. But the series is all about highlighting the incredible work women are doing outside of their clinical practice. In doing so, we're hoping to give these women a platform to share their work while also inspiring the next generation of women in medicine. Kind of the idea of the series came about when I was working with the American Medical Women's Association on the Gender Equity Task Force Leaky Pipeline Initiative.
Joanna, tell us a little bit more about that. What is the Leaky Pipeline Initiative?
Well, I'm glad you asked. The leaky pipeline is a metaphor for the attrition of women, not just in medicine, but in all STEM fields. For instance, in medicine, while there are now more women entering medicine than men, the number of women in leadership positions has not risen in proportion. Research on leaky pipeline and the initiative that I worked with serves to identify reasons why this is and ways to help promote equity in medicine.
All wonderful things. I know that when we are equals, then we can accomplish more together. And I love, love, love the idea of women helping each other out and making great things happen. Tell me about the background of your ideas for this podcast.
So I worked in the medical student division of the Leaky Pipeline Initiative, and we were discussing reasons why women we knew were leaving medicine at our level in medical school. The conversation quickly became focused on the perceived limitation that we have as women, fears of applying into a male-dominated specialty, having a family, being able to take time off to have kids, balancing our passion projects, or even being able to do or pursue our hobbies outside of medicine while trying to balance a clinical practice and family and other things that may be going on in our lives. As kind of medical students kept chatting, we started sharing stories about what kept us going and why we weren't leaving medicine or planning to. And the common theme was our incredible female mentors and conversations we've had with them. Hearing these women's stories of success and how they helped combat this was really empowering to show that maybe these schemes aren't real. And I began to think, well, maybe if more women in early years of training heard these stories, then maybe they too wouldn't feel trapped by the perceived notions of what we can or can't do as women in medicine.
Well, you are an inspiration to us as students. We all love your energy and the passion that you bring to medicine, and it gives us great hope for the future of medicine. And I certainly remember having many conversations with you about this, particularly on our overnight shifts in the ED. Fun times, weren't they?
Of course.
And you, at that time, you had shared some of the stories from some of the amazing women that you had met at these AMWA conferences. And I know we started to talk about as a way to really highlight the work that they did and how that they didn't take no for an answer and they accomplished amazing things. So I was excited to hear what you were going to do with that passion and inspiration.
Yeah, and I was so lucky to have worked with you during that time too, because I had this idea, but no kind of idea of how to kind of manage that and share these stories. And little did I know that you were a podcaster, and you suggested that, we create this podcast together. At the time, I had no clue how to produce a podcast or how to kind of do this on the back end. And you were willing to kind of step up and co-produce this series for me and help guide me along the way. definitely an example of when hard work meets luck. And as we talked that night in the ED, this is where this podcast really began. And I feel incredibly privileged to interview you for our very first episode.
Well, the privilege is all mine. Please let me make that very clear. You are one exceptional young lady with a bright future ahead. So it is my pleasure to be here and share this time with you.
Well, thank you. So, while the series we're working on is new, I know you're not new to podcasting. Tell us a little bit more about the other podcast you're working on, Money Minutes.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So, Money Minutes for Doctors actually has been in process for a little over 2 years, which is kind of crazy to me to think that it's been that long. It is a monthly podcast and really came out of the era of physician wellness. When I was working with young residents, they would come to me and say that they were focused on the idea of physician wellness and knew that that had to be a part of their professional practice, but they're kind of sick of hearing about eating better and exercising more, and simply stated the stress that they were dealing with came from financial matters. Specifically, what were they going to do with their $3, $4, or $500,000 in school debt? And as I thought about that, I realized that there weren't a lot of resources for financial matters for our young residents, our medical students, or even for our attending faculty in that matter. So I was able to team up with a financial expert, because admittedly, I am not a certified financial planner. But we were able to address many of these questions and concerns through Money Minutes for Doctors and hopefully give some information about financial matters that will benefit us all.
I think that work is so important. I know for me as a medical student, there's really little education on financial planning. And kind of the majority of us take out hundreds of thousands of dollars of loans that you're mentioning. And often along that way, we're reassured by our financial aid offices that, it's okay. We're going to be doctors. We'll be able to pay back this debt. How true is that, or real? As I know, I've been rotating. I know a lot of attendings I'm working with who are still managing that debt they took out as medical students.
Well, the times have changed. I think of my mentors who had gone to school when tuition was a fraction of what it is now. I also realized that during that time, physicians made a lot more money. Unfortunately, those factors have both changed, but quite simply, the cost of living has changed. And really, the whole climate of the practice of medicine has changed. So there's a lot of factors at play. And if the question is, can you pay back your debt? I would dare say generally the answer is yes. Obviously, it depends on how much debt you have, where you want to practice, what type of medicine you want to practice. But the truth is that you have to be very disciplined and diligent in its approach and paying those payments each month. The reality is that oftentimes it takes a whole career, 10, 20, even 30 years is not uncommon to be paying back student loans. So it's something that you really have to plan for and be prepared for.
Wow. And what advice might you have for me and our listeners who are still in their medical training on working to kind of pay off their medical school debts or even managing their debt at an early kind of stage in training?
Well, I think it's probably a lot of the advice that you got from your parents. Understand how good financial discipline will pay benefits long term. So think about having a savings account, think about having an emergency fund, think about investing in a 401k or another retirement vehicle early on, as the total amount that you have to invest will balloon to a much larger dollar amount versus if you waited till you were in your 30s or 40s to start saving. And in terms of the debt, again, it's a very unique situation, but currently the public student loan forgiveness options are quite wonderful and really have benefited many physicians. They're starting to come into maturity now where, as you probably know, it's a 10-year payoff, or you have to make 120 payments on your student loans before the remainder of your med school loan debt is forgiven. However, we're now seeing physicians come into that age of maturity, and oftentimes they're having $100,000 or even $200,000 forgiven. So if you can make that program work for you, that is a wonderful benefit.
I think your podcast, Money Minutes, is definitely something that's a needed resource for medical trainees across the board. And there's so many different formats and ways to share that information. How did you settle on using podcasting as a platform for Money Minutes?
Well, I was fortunate enough to have a mentor myself, and podcasting was just coming into flavor for the medical community. And what I realized as a working mom that everybody's time is valuable, and now information is really best digested in small bites in an on-the-go format. And podcasting answered those issues for me. The days of spending hours in the library or putting the kids to bed and probably having hours to study. I don't think that's the American life anymore. So we all have to learn to fit in our education on the go. And a podcast was an easy way to do that, whether you're sitting waiting for a conference to start, sitting waiting for rounds, maybe even sitting waiting for your OR room to turn over, or commuting in the car. A podcast can be digested at any time during the day.
I really, as I've gone throughout my third year, noticed how podcast really seems to be the new platform for medical education now as well. As I've been kind of rotating about, I found a podcast in pretty much every single specialty. Do you think this may be the new way we share information with one another across the board in medicine?
Well, it certainly is for now. I think there's a lot of information coming at you. There's no doubt we live in the information age. And so the tough part is going to be how you accept that information and how to use it. I think the thing that probably has to happen is a little bit of vetting in terms of what are the quality podcasts that you're going to stay true to forevermore. As I'm sure you can appreciate, they're all of different topics, different quality. And so ones that really seem to resonate with you and give you value, I suspect will be the ones that you subscribe to. And we just have to make sure that we do our job as producers in giving our listeners a quality experience with great information for them to benefit from.
And I know throughout our journey on making this podcast, you've guided me on how to edit, record episodes, and what software to use. For our listeners out there, what kind of general advice might you have for those thinking about getting started on creating their own podcast?
That's a great question. And I think I would really question people to say, what is your passion? If you have a message that you really want to share, then that's your podcast. And you have to be passionate about it in order to make it very engaging and exciting and energizing. As you know, the more engaged your host is, then the better the podcast is to listen to. I also think you need to do a general survey of what quality of resources are out there. For example, if your passion is orthopedics and there's 200 orthopedic podcasts out there, well, I hate to say it, but it would be a big challenge to be successful. However, if you have something of a different topic that maybe is less competitive, then it just might be the right time to strike out on your own and start the podcasting process.
Any ideas or tips on what formats or software people could use or things that you use that you find helpful?
Well, that's a great question. I'm using the same software that my mentor had shared with me, and it's what we're using today, as I have shared with you. We use Zencaster to record the podcasts, and I've been very happy with this software. It's performed very well for me over the years. The updates are free. The cost is very reasonable, certainly depending on what subscription service you get. But it's very reliable software and uniformly performs great. And then for editing, we use Hindenburg. I think that is considered the gold standard for editing. It is not specific to medical podcasting, but used for a variety of platforms, radio, etc. But it's very dynamic. It offers probably more options than I even am aware of. In fact, I'm pretty sure that's the case. However, I'm always able to accomplish what I need to for this podcast. And I always love the way that you can overlay different technologies and music and things like that that really make it a more pleasant experience for your listener.
I know that's definitely true. And some advice that you gave me was to really pay attention to the music you pick in the beginning of your podcast, because that's how it sets the tone.
Absolutely. And it's going to stay with you forever. So you have to really love it.
I know too that you wear a lot of different hats. And you're emergency physician, mom. You also sail, and you just opened kind of your own wellness medicine clinic. How do you kind of manage to balance everything?
I'm not sure. It has been a crazy ride. I am blessed to have lots of support behind me and lots of interests and resources. But as you know, life is all about a series of opportunities, and you have to choose which ones that you're going to pursue. However, I also feel that if you see a need that's unmet in our medical community, then it's also up to you to step up to the plate and work for the betterment of others. And that's one of the reasons I'm a big fan of the American Medical Women's Association, and certainly thankful for them in supporting our series and helping to get the message out, because there are amazing women out there who are doing amazing things. I know oftentimes they are shy to take credit for the work that they do, but Joanna, this is your time to help bring them to the stage and give them the spotlight they deserve.
Thanks. I really hope we're able to achieve that through this series. And just a note to end on, any general advice for those listening in on pursuing their own passion projects?
Well, I think it's what we've said so far. If you see a need that's unmet in the medical community, don't sit back and wait for someone else to come up with the idea or wait for it. Don't complain about what's not there. Look to yourself to be a problem solver. Look to yourself to give added value to the people that we serve, to our colleagues around us. I think that we are all better off when we can work together. We're all better off when we can support each other. And that makes for a delightfully satisfying professional experience. But I would dare guess at the end of the day, when it's time to reflect, it makes you proud on all you've accomplished.
Well, thank you so much for chatting with us and kind of sharing your words of wisdom and a little bit about your own projects. And thank you to all the listeners who are tuning in. If you're interested in learning more about the podcast or being featured on an upcoming episode, you can find our contact information in the show notes. Also be sure to check out the Brown Emergency Medicine blog and subscribe to Dr. McAteer's podcast, Money Minutes. Thank you to the American Medical Women's Association for supporting the series. For more ways to be engaged in the community and meet more incredible women in medicine, sign up to be a member at amwadoc.com. Hope to see you at the next conference. And for now, have a great day, and don't forget to light a spark of positivity in whatever you may do today.